Today's episode has slides that you can use to follow along. These slides can be obtained at patient-endurance.org/episode-15.
Greetings. This is the Patient Endurance Podcast with Stephen Dale. Today we will continue our discussion on the Revelations. So where are we going today? Well, we're going to look at the Seventh Beast Empire. Who was it? We'll go into the historic background of the Seventh Beast and of the Beast Empires in general. We're going to look at the impact of the Seventh Beast Empire, specifically how it related to the return of Israel, and also, is it a template for the Eighth Beast Empire? We're going to cover some of the prophecies of the Jewish return, which is critical. If the Jewish people don't return to their country, how could you have a temple to desecrate? And bottom line is, the Seventh Beast has come and gone. How can we be certain? Well, Israel exists. The next Beast Empire, the Eighth, will be the one that desecrates the temple. So let's kind of recap what we did the other podcast. To whom and why was the book of Revelations written? It tells us in Revelations chapter 1, verse 11 in the ESV, write what you see in a book and send it to the seven churches. And why? To prepare us, to give us hope, and to keep us from fear when these things start to occur. Okay, what is the big deal about the seven churches that we covered last podcast? So that we as Christians will reflect on our walk with Jesus. And also, there were also specific messages to the churches, the end times.
I think that's important, Steve, because if there wasn't, then why is it in there, right?
I agree. I mean, the book of Revelations was written for a purpose, so the church can be prepared for what is to come and to anticipate it. He also gave hope to those who repented and patiently endured within the seven churches. That was one of the most common themes of all seven churches. To those who are victorious will be rewards. And this was all the way from the churches that weren't so good to the ones that were very good. The same message was repeated. What were some of the biggest problems the churches had? Well, we talked about the Nicolaitans and Jezebel. The Nicolaitans did not believe you had to stop sinning, and they continued to live cardinal lives. So they were not willing to conform to Jesus Christ or let the Holy Spirit work in them. Jezebel stood for sexual lust and unnatural relationships. Again, that kind of builds on the Nicolaitans. But as I was stating, the message to all the churches is constant. Jesus calls us to be victorious. Even Smyrna and Philadelphia were told to stand firm. So now let's look at what Revelation 17 states about the seventh beast and the eighth beast. I'm going to read verse 3, then go on to verse 7 through 13 in the ESV. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now down to verse 7. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who live on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast, that he was and is not and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth, and is one of the 7. And he goes to destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So the question is, who is the seventh beast empire?
So let's look at that. So we have a graphic here. Hopefully you've been pulling the charts down, which are at patient-endurance.org. We've used this in the past, and if you recall it, what we had was a chart that had some black spots over it, okay? Or we had black lines covering pieces of it. Well, those pieces were Revelation 17. And so now you understand why. What we're doing is setting up a framework to analyze this. And we didn't get this on our own. We got this from Van Kampen, and he used the same thing. It's good. I'm not going to reduplicate what he did because it's just good. It really shows and puts clarity on how Daniel fits with the revelation. And what we see here is that under the column that says Revelation 17, it has 5 have fallen. Well, Daniel, you got to realize Daniel is alive during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Babylon is that third kingdom. But prior to that was 2 other kingdoms that tries to get rid of the Jews. One is Assyria, and they succeeded in destroying the northern kingdoms and almost destroy Jerusalem and Judah. They destroy all of Judah except for Jerusalem, and God kills 185,000 of them, and they go back home. This is all very well documented in history. And then you have the first beast kingdom was Egypt. They tried to kill the Jews off by killing all the babies, and so the male babies, I should say. And this is the Exodus, and so that's how we start Daniel from 3. So we get there then after the Babylonians is the Medo-Persian Empire. Then we have the Greek Empire. So that's 5 have fallen. 1 is. So when John is alive and writing Revelation, the Roman Empire is there. And that is the one that is. So we know that Rome is the 6th beast empire. And then we have the other is yet to come, and he must remain for a little while. And then the 8th beast, the beast who once was and now is not. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. And if we look further to the right, what we'll see is we have Daniel 2 and how it matches against that, and Daniel 7, and then Daniel 9. And you see I've got these boxes around it, each of those, because what you have in Daniel 2 was legs of iron. That was the Roman Empire. And remember, we talked about this back when we were talking about Daniel 2, that he jumps and says there's feet and 10 toes, partly of iron, partly of clay, and that was not the Roman Empire of that time. And we verified that when we got to Daniel 7, and there was a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and the 4th beast had 10 horns, which were 10 kings, and then a little horn came up and subdued 3 of the horns. And so we have this is matching what Revelation 7 is talking about. He's got 7 heads with 10 horns, okay, and then the Antichrist subdues 3 of those. This is how we get that same thing. That's the same prophecy as Revelation 17. And similarly, we had in Daniel 9 then, the Messiah is cut off when he dies, when he's crucified, and then the people of the ruler who will come, which is the Romans, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And then we know that the Antichrist comes, that prince comes and sets up an abomination. Well, that hasn't happened yet. And that's the 8th beast. So these are never mentioned, the 7th beast, only Revelation 17. And what Van Kampen deduced and what we deduce as well, and we totally agree, is that all of those, the 6th, 7th, and 8th beasts come from the Roman Empire. Because he says the beast who once was, now is not, belongs to the 7, is going to his destruction.
I'm just going to highlight something here. The same beast empire that sanctioned the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is going to be the same one that tries to eliminate the Jewish population in total.
And so if the Roman Empire is where it comes from, one of the things that I started to figure out that I needed to do was go study the Roman Empire. Did I really know what the Roman Empire was? We think we know, but then once I actually started studying it, it's like, didn't really put all that together. So let's dive into this and try to make some sense of it, okay? So what we have in the slide, you'll see a map of Rome at its height, which is 117 AD. Now, the Roman Empire comes from the Roman Republic, and that's during the 6th century BC all the way up to 27 BC. And what happens in 27 BC is we get the first Caesar. That's Julius Caesar. And so from 27 BC to 286 AD, there is one unified Roman Empire. And the thing I'd like to point out that I noticed is, the Roman Empire controlled portions of all the previous beast kingdoms. They don't control all of it, but that's not what the thing says, okay? And so it just says he belongs to the seven and he's going to his destruction, okay? So that's good enough for me. He controls parts of all those kingdoms. Now, here's a part that I'm sure I got taught in school, but it's been so long ago that I'm like, oh yeah, the Roman Empire split. And so in 286 AD, the Roman Empire splits into a Western Roman Empire and an Eastern Roman Empire. And part of that's because they're becoming so corrupt that there's too many factions now. And so you don't have a single Caesar that can control the Roman Empire. And so the Western Roman Empire, what you see in the picture here is its biggest extent. And on the right, we have the Eastern Empire, whose capital is located at Constantinople. That's also the name of that city is Byzantium, and that was also called the Byzantium Empire. And then later on, we know that the Ottomans take this, and it's called Istanbul. Find out then as we study, okay, most of this from Wikipedia, so I'm not like trying to go crazy here doing research, because that's adequate for what we're doing. What we find is that the Western Roman Empire falls in 476 AD, and what happens is it's slowly eaten up or destroyed by Germanic kingdoms. And it's not just one group. We have the Anglo-Saxons go in and take over the UK or England, that portion that the Romans controlled. The Franks come down and take France. We have different groups, Goths, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Huns, Vandals, and Gales. And all of these slowly take portions of Rome until in 476 AD, they all surround Rome and destroy Rome. And the Roman Empire, you think, is gone. Well, guess what? Not quite. There's an Eastern Roman Empire. And what you see pictured here is in 555 AD, the greatest extent of the Eastern Roman Empire, which they actually take much of the Western Roman Empire back. But they then, the same thing happens to them. They slowly get encroached on by Muslims, by Europeans, and eventually what happens in 1453 AD is they're taken over by the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire lasts until World War I.
So historically, many countries claim to be the Roman Empire. Well, let's analyze these claims. Two of the biggest claims are the Western Roman Empire, which was centered in Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire, which is in Istanbul. Let's look at the Western Roman Empire. There are several folks who claim they could be this part of the Roman Empire. One are the Germanic tribes that formed the Holy Roman Empire. And by the way, Kaiser means Caesar. Another group is France Gaul. And this is because Napoleon himself defeats the Holy Roman Empire. And the last group that has a claim to this for the Western is Italy. And it's mostly because of their location, with Rome being the capital. So what about the Eastern Roman Empire? Well, there are two contenders here. The first is, near the end of the Eastern Roman Empire, a Russian king marries into it. This is likely when the Russian leaders started using the title Tsar, which means Caesar. And it was around the same time that the Eastern Orthodox Church becomes centered in Russia. And why was this? Well, at the same time Russia married into the Eastern Roman Empire, something else was occurring. Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, and Serbia were forming the Ottoman Empire. And they eventually defeated the Eastern Roman Empire. So the question is, was one of these the Seventh Beast Empire? And did one of these play a pivotal role in Jewish history? So let's look at the Ottoman Empire, which is one of the two main candidates we have now for the new Roman Empire, the other being the Holy Roman Empire. Well, when the Ottoman Empire fits the Eastern Roman Empire fairly well, as you see on the map, and it certainly is not consistent with the Western Roman Empire. Now, some will try to equate the Ottomans with the Muslims at large, but, this is not true. The Ottoman Empire made no attempt to eliminate the Jews. Now, they did have pogroms, and these are localized areas of persecution, but nothing attempting total extinction. In fact, by 1867, they allowed Jews to buy land in Israel. So this is hardly an attempt to eliminate all the Jewish people. Now, there is no Ottoman Empire today, nor is there a united Muslim group. So what we're saying, this would be inconsistent with Daniel 11 and Ezekiel 38. You need a unified group if you're going to have a beast empire.
I agree, Steve. You You just don't have that. And so if it is through the Ottoman Empire, this would still be future. But so let's look at the Holy Roman Empire now and see if they have a decent claim. The Holy Roman Empire isn't really like an empire through domination. No, it's more of a confederation of smaller kingdoms that were governed by the more powerful Germanic kingdoms. And it's largely centered or began around the Franks, which were like the primary house that controlled Germany at the time. But there's many others, okay? For instance, the Carolingians is where Charlemagne came from. They're more centered in France, but they controlled the entire French and German areas. Later then, though, you'll see by 1125 AD, the Hohenstaufens control all of this. And by this point, they also control Rome. 1544, the Habsburgs control, and they've expanded by taking Spain, but they don't control France. But they still control Rome. And so they have a claim to be the Roman Empire. They're then destroyed by Napoleon, which is why they've never controlled France, except back in Charlemagne's day. And so Napoleon makes a claim, but the French really have no claim. Now, this Holy Roman Empire, well, yes, they were defeated by Napoleon. You can make a claim through Charlemagne from 800 to 1806 that they are the Roman Empire. And when the Nazis come along, they go and actually point this out in history and say, oh, that was the First Reich of the German Empire. And the German Empire then comes back in 1871, and those are the people in World War I. And so that was considered by the Nazis the Second Reich. And then Hitler comes along, and the Nazis, and they were considered the Third Reich and were supposed to last until eternity, right? Well, we both know that didn't happen. But from the Third Reich comes World War II. Pointed out that Tsar means Caesar, Kaiser means Caesar as well. And so you see in their minds at least that they are the Roman Empire. Now Hitler, he tries to reestablish the Holy Roman Empire. And what we have here is a map in World War II and what they controlled. And it's actually, one could contend, bigger even because, for instance, Spain, while Spain is technically neutral, they were an ally of Hitler because Hitler sent forces down there to help them gain control. And so I would contend that they have captured the entire Western Roman Empire and beyond. The other thing is they tried to ruthlessly destroy the Jews, which is what we've seen in all of these beastly empires. We saw the Egyptians try to destroy them. We saw the Assyrians try to destroy them. During the reign of the Persians, what we see is they try to exterminate the Jews through Haman. So this is an important piece of this. And so Hitler trying to actually exterminate the Jews and nearly successful is a big portion of why we believe Hitler is the seventh beast. But the bigger reason why we think Hitler is the seventh beast because Israel is reestablished as a country following World War II because of the Holocaust. And so what we believe is that you can legitimately say that Hitler is from the Roman Empire through the Holy Roman Empire. And we would say that this is consistent with Daniel 7:24 and Revelation 17. So it's both Old Testament and New. He can make that claim. So something I want to do, I put this together many years ago. Remember I brought up about Pharaoh's dream. There was 7 years of good and 7 years of bad. And one of the things I had was, is this like a pointer? And so I started analyzing Hitler and World War II and the reign. When did he come to power, etc.? And so I just started going from Hitler's death in April 45. Because this is not the eighth beast, we don't start with 1,335 days. Instead, I went back 1,260 days to a midpoint, went back another 1,260 days to find the beginning of the 7 years. And then I did the same thing to go back to find the beginning of the first 7 years. And what I come up with is 13 July 31 for the beginning, and the final 7 years, the beginning is 6 June 38. and I started looking through history to say, does this match? And again, this is not this is not biblical. This is just me analyzing this, right? But one of the things I find is on July 31 is when the German bank, they default. And so this is part of the Great Depression. And it's interesting. That makes a ton of sense that it would begin through their finances. Because when we look at the Revelation, what's happening? There's similar events going on. We have essentially a Great Depression in that time frame as well. And so that's really cool. Then we go on to 6 June 38. And I can't find anything specifically on 6 June 38. But one of the things I did is I pulled up various things like the Anschluss, Aktien Arbeitsschwei, Kristallnacht, that's the Night of Broken Glass, and when they invaded Poland. So the Night of Broken Glass is when they go in to Austria and start rounding up Jews. But before that was Aktien Arbeitsschwei, okay? And I may be butchering that. I'm not German. So that was on 13 June 1938. And this was the first time the Nazis actually put 1,000 Jews into a concentration camp. Now, they had done other things to the Jews prior to that, but this is the first time they rounded them up in mass. And that's 1 week away. And we both know, especially in this time frame, they don't just make a decision and we go out and do it. No, it takes time to execute a decision like that. A week makes sense in that time frame. And so this could well be, and so we have starting points for both that are highly consistent with the Pharaoh's dream. Interesting. I don't know if that means anything yet, but it certainly kind of piqued my interest. Wow, that matches, or at least is provides a level of consistency. Okay, I don't want to go too crazy on that.
So let's look at the characteristics of the Antichrist. And we gave this to you back when we did the book of Daniel. And our question is, does Hitler match? The answer is yes, but no. He misses a few critical parts. He is technically a king of the north. And did he have 10 other kings with him? Well, we'll get to that on the next slide. But in fact, he did take over 9 other countries. Did he make an agreement? No, he did not. He couldn't make an agreement because there was no nation of Israel. Is he a despicable person? I don't think anyone would contend that he was not. This man was pure evil in what he did. Now, the first powerful during the last 3.5 years, yes and no. I mean, he as Dale went through this 7 and 7 years, he kind of fits that. However, turns on Jerusalem and sets up an abomination that causes desolation in the temple. There is no nation of Israel. There was no temple in Hitler's time. So he failed miserably on this criteria. Was he blasphemous? Did he exalt himself above God? I think we could safely say that too. And did he honor a god of fortresses? Well, Hitler's blitzkrieg, his tanks, his war machine, he definitely honored a god of fortresses. Did his end come like a flood? Yes, when he fell, the Allies just washed right over Germany. Very little resistance at the end. However, here's another big bullet. His end comes at a time of indignation. There is no way Hitler could be the 8th beast empire, because if he were, that would mean we're in the millennial kingdom. And I just look at the news every morning. There is no way this is the millennial kingdom. God is not being honored throughout the world.
And, so basically what we come up with is Hitler correlates well with these characteristics of the Antichrist, but he's not the 8th beast, right? So he can't match all of it. No one can. Right? Because the 8th beast hasn't come yet.
So the question is, was he the 7th beast?
I think he is.
Is a pretty good case for it. He sets up a template, certainly, for the 8th beast. You can easily make a case that he came from the Roman Empire. When you look at the area of land that Germany controlled or influenced, it pretty well matches up with the Roman Empire. Did he try to eliminate the Jewish population? 59% of the Jews in that area were destroyed, 9.7 million. And this is one of God's gauntlets. If there is no nation of Israel, how could there be a covenant? But he failed. What about the seals? It appears the seals were being revealed during the lead-up to Hitler's reign. Seal 2, World War I, Seal 3, the Great Depression, Seal 4, World War II, Seal 5, persecution. But recall, birth pains. These birth pains are getting worse and worse until the actual birth occurs. So yes, it looks like Germany could have met these goals, but they failed in one attempt.
And I want you to understand, we're not saying that the seals were opened. That's not at all what we're trying to say here. We're just pointing out the similarities. And I've seen people poo-poo this many times. It's obvious. And what we're trying to say is, hey, just like we were telling you in Daniel, there's dualities, that these seals were reused by God to show us what's coming. This is a foretaste of this is what it will be like.
So were there 10 kings involved with Hitler? Well, if you count Germany as one of them, Hitler actually took control of 9 other countries: Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Yugoslavia, and Greece. Now, other countries worked with him, but he actually forcibly controlled 9 other countries for 10 kings. However, where does it all lead? Israel's return. Hitler could not take control of a temple that did not exist. But one of the things he did that set things up uniquely for the 8th Beast Empire is the establishment of the nation of Israel. So let's look back at the Muslims as the 7th Beast Empire, since a lot of folks really claim this. If you look at the map we have here, the geographic correlation with Rome kind of fits, but they don't really claim to be the Roman Empire as the other groups did. The Ottomans don't persecute the Jews to the level Hitler did, and they in fact allow the Jews to buy land in Israel in 1867. They have no real part in the return of the Jews to form a country of Israel again, but Hitler did.
Instead, what they do is they're trying to destroy them. So the only real role they have is to try and destroy them, right? Why is that, Steve?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Dale, because all of this comes from Hitler. Hitler actually teamed with the Grand Mufti Ha-Amin el-Husseini of Jerusalem at the time. The Nazis trained the Mufti with Mein Kampf, and a desire to kill the Jews. Mufti trained Yasser Arafat, and Hamas used Mein Kampf. So what we're seeing here is a direct route from Hitler down to the hatred of the Jews in the Middle East. And you really can't name a specific person within the Muslim community to be the Beast Empire. It's scattered. If you look at this map, there are many different fractions of Muslims.
Yeah, I find this fascinating that when you really see what's behind all of this anti-Semitic hatred for the Jews through the Muslims, there's lots of documentation post-Holocaust that this really comes from.
And why would we be surprised? If, in fact, Hitler is the 7th Beast Empire, and he's setting the template for the 8th Beast Empire, then the things that are occurring here, the hatred of the Jews, as well as the establishment of Israel, are critical to God's plan.
Exactly. And you don't see this across all Muslims. You just don't. So one of the things I want to do now is let's look at some prophecies of Israel's return, okay? And in Deuteronomy, God gives them this set of blessings and curses they're supposed to read. And in the part about the curses, okay, that starts in Deuteronomy 28 and 29, and it talks about if you don't do what I tell you, you'll be cursed to the point that you would be exiled. And so in Deuteronomy 30, then it picks up and says, when all these things come upon you, the blessings and the curses I have set before you, and you call them to mind in all the nations which the Lord has banished you, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey his voice with all your heart and all your soul, according to everything I am giving you today, then he will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you and gather you from all the nations to which the Lord your God has scattered you. Even if you have been banished to the farthest horizon, he will gather you and return you from there. And there is no doubt that this is certainly part of the first return. But I want you to see that this covers all exiles that they've been in. So they're currently in a second exile. This covers that too. So let's look at the first exile. Why were they exiled? Well, Jeremiah tells us that they forgot God. They were doing Baal and idol worship. They were committing adultery with their neighbors' wives. They violated the Sabbath. They were violating the release on the Sabbath years. They were killing their children as sacrifices in the valley of Topheth, which is also called the valley of Ben Hinnom. Their leaders lacked justice, and their shepherds were false, and their prophets were lying. This is why God kicked them out and allowed Nebuchadnezzar to come and destroy them. and exile them to Babylon. Jeremiah 12 and Jeremiah 25 both tell us that it wasn't just Jerusalem. Jerusalem and all the surrounding nations will go into exile. Then after 70 years, Babylon will be destroyed with an everlasting desolation and exiled. And that happens, okay? Nebuchadnezzar carries off the first wave of exiles in 605 BC. The Babylonian Empire destroys Jerusalem in 586 BC on the 9th of Av. And that 9th of Av is important. We'll talk about it in the future. In Jeremiah 29, confirms again that the exile will last 70 years. But what we know from what we studied previously when we were talking about all the decrees is that Cyrus allows them to come, return and rebuild the temple, and so that they can pray to God for Cyrus. And this return was documented and prophesied, first prophesied in Isaiah 45:1, and then documented in Ezra 1 and the Second Chronicles, chapter 36. The second exile, so they were exiled again. Well, why were they exiled? Because they missed the visitation of the Messiah. Instead, they killed the Messiah. This was part of the parable of the watchful servants and the parable of the tenants. They were jealous of the Christ. And I would also point out, remember when we talked to you about the decrees, we talked to you about the 40-year miracle on the Day of Atonement. So for 40 years, God told them, you're not getting atoned for. And that began when Jesus began his ministry. This is why they're exiled. Now, that second exile was prophesied in Daniel 9:26. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy Jerusalem. And it does. Okay, Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed in 70 AD on the 9th of Av again. That's why it's so important. They were destroyed on the exact same day. Now, the actual mass exile doesn't begin until after the Bar Kokhba revolt, which happens in 132 to 136 AD. And there, the Romans, and they just ended the rebellion. Whoever wasn't killed was exiled. And this exile, they would not even allow them to enter Jerusalem. And so, is there a specific passage talking about the return? Well, when I started studying this, many people claim lots of things, okay? But when you look at those, it really doesn't match. Really, when you get down to it, it's difficult to pin down. And I think there's a reason for that. And part of that reason is it's all surrounded around the eighth beast and the difficulty we're having of when is he coming? And so Daniel 9 ends, 9:26 it says, prior to the ruler who will come, who sets up an abomination at the temple. Well, guess what? If there's no temple, the prophecy is not going to be fulfilled. Now we have an Israel, and still there's no temple. Again, if there's no temple, how do you get a third temple without an Israel as a nation, right? Well, first you had to get Israel as a nation. And if you recall when we were talking about in the interlude what the rabbis think, these guys want a third temple so bad they can taste it, right? They want it. And so are we near that third temple? Because that first you had a nation, then you have the Jews wanting a temple. Now, I'd point out some key events leading up to Israel's return. In 1867, a British officer by the name of Charles Warren begins survey of Palestine, and the Ottoman Empire allowed him. He couldn't just go there and do it. Again, if you recall, we said a few minutes ago, Steve said, the Jews began buying land in Palestine. So the Ottoman Empire began moderating. And it's interesting that on the same year that Warren goes to survey Palestine, the Jews are allowed by a land act to buy land in Palestine. 50 years later, in 1917, the Brits, as part of what they're seeing in World War I, there are people moved because the Jews helped the UK to liberate Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. And these British Christians, they helped write the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration says the Jews need a homeland. And it's amazing because the Brits wouldn't have done that if these things here you have God aligning and moving their hearts to make this declaration. In 1947, then, the UN declared that Israel needs a home, and that home needs to be in Palestine. Well, guess what? That would never have come unless people started looking at what Hitler did in the Holocaust. This is why Hitler's so important. Okay, it was that massive destruction during the Holocaust that, again, moved Christians' hearts. Truman, for instance, he's an evangelical Christian. He was behind it because no one wanted to do this. And Roosevelt was not going to do it. But Truman, there is no doubt God worked his way through that and brought Truman to power so that he would be there at the right time. That is classic God. Later on, 1948, Israel becomes a nation because of this. And then all of the surrounding nations come at them. This is Psalm 83 being fulfilled. Now, lots of people don't believe that. I don't know how you get a better example. They all rose up. All the nations around them rose up and tried to destroy them immediately. And if you listen to Jonathan Cahn, he's got some great videos on this. Of course, that's Psalm 83. But again, there's duality. Psalm 83 has been fulfilled multiple times. Okay? In 1967, when we have the 6-Day War, they all rise up again around them. And it's fulfilled again. Oh, by the way, when that one happens, hey, Jerusalem is captured and the Temple Mount is captured. But even though they gained control of the Temple Mount, they didn't build a temple. Man, why not? Because they aren't crazy. They know they have to have an agreement with the world, with the nations around them, to allow them to build a temple, because they know what's on top of the Temple Mount, and that's the Dome of the Rock.
So what we're seeing here as key events leading to Israel's return is a very systematic process God put in place. And as bad as Hitler was, he was critical to winning the hearts of the people in the UN to give Israel a country again.
Yeah, and to me, the duality of the seals that we talked about, that was one of the first things that I started looking into. And then I came to the conclusion, no, that's not really the seals. But once you start seeing the duality in Daniel, man, this is so obvious. Hitler is the seventh beast because all of these things bring about the nation of Israel again.
It also tells us what the eighth beast is going to look like. Hitler came from nowhere. He came as a savior for Germany. People loved him. They were looking for good things to come out of him. And then, everything went south. And he started persecuting and killing Jewish people. Look at this template as the future moves forward.
Absolutely. We're going to turn it over to Dave and let Dave give us a message on the majesty of God in the throne room.
Welcome, listener. You've been tracking with us in last podcast. I shared at the end about the majesty of God's throne room, the awesomeness of God Almighty. And as we come into chapter 4 in this throne room description, it ends with these words about God Almighty. You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. So we're a part of this great creation. You're a part of this great creation. But as we go into chapter 5 of Revelation, there's a great dilemma, a dilemma of who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals. And the writer is the Apostle John, one of Jesus' first 12 disciples, following him throughout his life and now living in exile, but writing down what he is being given as revelations of heaven, the end, and this great kingdom that Jesus established. And so John begins to weep. He weeps because no one is found worthy to open the scroll or to look inside. But then in verse 5, it says this, Then one of the elders said to me, Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. You've probably heard the gospel is good news, or the gospel being defined as good news. And good news, though, requires bad news. And here we have the bad news in humanity is no one is worthy. You're not worthy. I'm not worthy. The best person you can imagine, the Pope, is not worthy. No one on earth in humanity is worthy to open the scroll except for Jesus Christ. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He is the Root of David. He is the one who now stands at the center of the throne room, and all are worshiping him, looking to him because he is worthy. And so this is where we stop today. It's just the good news that Jesus is worthy. If you've been confused about your effort, the effort of others, what you believe is what you believe to be holy or righteous in and of yourself. In humanity alone, there is no one who is qualified except for Jesus Christ.
Well, thank you, Pastor Dave, for your insight on Revelations 5. Now I'm going to take a moment just to summarize what we covered today. 1, we believe Hitler was in fact the seventh beast empire. He meets the criteria for it in Revelation 17. His life exemplifies the Antichrist criteria from Daniel. So we got both the Old and the New Testament backing this up, with the exception of those criteria that are reserved for the eighth beast empire. And in fact, his coming brought about the return of Israel as a nation. So the Holocaust itself, as bad as it was, it caused the United Nations to move forward with identifying Israel as a country again. And we need this as a precondition to the 70th week in Daniel. No other man in history meets the Antichrist criteria as closely as Hitler does. Some folks believe that Muslims may be the seventh beast empire, except this denies the impact of World War II to the Jews. You know, the bottom line is that when you're looking at a conclusion you're making, you really got to examine your biases and see how they force your conclusion. And a lot of folks have a bias toward the Muslims being the seventh beast empire. But when you look at the criteria, it really doesn't match up. So what's next? Well, the agreement begins Daniel's 70th week. And so far, that has not yet occurred. There are preconditions that must be met before an agreement can be reached. First, the eighth beast must be here. Is he already here? Well, we're going to examine that. Another big issue is the Dome of Rock stands over the Holy of Holies at the moment. And we'd recommend you look at Joel Kramer. He's an extraordinary archaeologist, and we have a link for that included in these slides. And finally, and this is a big one, we need peace with the Muslims in Israel. And not just any peace. It's got to be a peace with one critical requirement, that the third temple could be rebuilt. So next time we'll look at the eighth beast and look at the other preconditions to the agreement that must be met.
And so as we wrap up here, I want to talk about the exiles one more time. And I want you to understand that we talked about a first exile and a second exile, which that's what the Jews have returned from. And I want you to understand that there's a third exile coming. This happens during the tribulation. And the question is, why are they exiled again? Well, because they make an agreement with the Antichrist for peace. That agreement allowed the rebuilding of the temple. And then what we find out is the Antichrist will set up an abomination in the temple. And Jesus tells us when that happens, you're to flee. And so this is why they're exiled. In addition, we have Daniel 11:31 through 35 confirms that. Daniel 12:1 also confirms that they're spread all over. Matthew 24 tells them to flee. Daniel 9 tells them about the abomination. Revelation 12 confirms when the abomination happens and the war in heaven happens, Satan will attack the Jewish nation again, and part of them are going to flee into the wilderness. Part are going to accept the Antichrist. They're under judgment. The ones who flee are not. Those who know their God will stand firm. And so when we look at the return from this exile, this is one of the most documented events in prophecy outside of Christ's actual return. It's all over the place. We have Micah 4, we have Amos 9, Zephaniah 3, Malachi 3, Zechariah 14, Joel 2, Psalm 126, Psalm 147, Jeremiah 3. Then we have portions of Jeremiah 30, 31, and 33, Isaiah 2, Isaiah 11, 27, 62. Again, there's other spots, and there's clear duality toward the end, which is Jeremiah 4, 12, and 16. And then we have one that many people I've heard preach on, saying this is why they're returned now, is Ezekiel 36 and 37. The problem is when you look at all these passages, and you look at them closely, the only way they're about the current Jews is if there's duality to them, just like we learned about there's a duality in Daniel at places, and even in the Revelation here at places. And so we have to be very careful, because all of these are really, they're about the return after Christ's return, and how Christ sets up his millennial rule, and how they're blessed then during the millennial rule. So if there's no duality in any of this, then it's not about their current return. And this is partly how we can see that this return is leading to something negative, not something good. Even though the Jews want it to be good and they want this third temple to be, they want it to bring the Messiah. Sure, it's going to bring the Messiah and judgment. So we have to be, careful when we're reading to look for these things. The big thing is the third exile has not happened yet. And the only way to link these passages to the second exile is through duality.
So what's our question of the day? It's pretty obvious. Who is the eighth beast? Now, we're not going to tell you exactly a name there, but we're going to give you the criteria to watch for, as we've been doing. So your homework for the next podcast is to read Revelations 13 and 17, as well as Ezekiel 38 and 39. As always, we've attached a list of our full references to the end of the slides. I want to thank you for listening today. This is Stephen Dale signing off. As always, if you have comments or questions, send us a note. If you disagree, send a comment with your logic and reasoning. We'd like to thank our publisher, Nosy Mouse Publishing at nosymouse.com for the great job they did in editing our podcast. God bless you in your studies of God's Word.